The first thing my mother did when she walked into that courtroom was look at my shoes. Not my face. Not the bruised exhaustion under my eyes after 3 sleepless nights. Not the trembling folder in my hands that contained 15 years of my life compressed into legal documents and receipts and secrets. Just my shoes. Cheap black flats with a crack near the heel. I saw the corner of her mouth twitch. That tiny expression dragged me straight back to being 14 years old again, standing in the kitchen while she inspected me like spoiled produce. "Laura," she used to sigh, "you always look unfortunate." The courtroom smelled like dust, old paper, and burnt coffee. The air conditioner rattled overhead, fighting a losing battle against the July heat. My palms were slick. Across the aisle, my mother sat beside my older brother Daniel in a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than my rent. She looked perfect. Of course she did. Evelyn Hart never appeared in public unless she looked untouchable. People in town loved her. She chaired charity galas. She donated to hospitals. She hugged grieving widows for photographs. Everyone called her a pillar of the community. They had no idea what she was like behind closed doors. The judge shuffled papers while lawyers whispered nearby. I tried to steady my breathing, but my chest felt packed with broken glass. Because today wasn't just about money. It was about humiliation. About every year my mother spent making sure I understood exactly where I ranked in this family. At the bottom. Below Daniel. Below appearances. Below strangers. Below the goddamn dogs she bred for competitions. My father died 8 months earlier from pancreatic cancer. Fast and cruel. One day he was laughing at old Western movies, the next he was yellow-skinned and shaking in a hospital bed, apologizing for being sick. I stayed with him. Not Daniel. Not my mother. Me. I fed him ice chips when he couldn't swallow. I cleaned him after he lost control of his body. I slept in plastic hospital chairs while machines beeped through the darkness. And when he cried one night because he thought he smelled like death, I held his hand and lied to him. "No, Dad. You smell like peppermint." Because I had rubbed peppermint oil beneath his nose before changing him. That's what love looks like. Not charity galas. Not diamond necklaces. Not staged smiles. But none of that mattered to my mother. The moment Dad died, she became a different person. Cold. Efficient. Hungry. 3 weeks after the funeral, she changed the locks on the house. I came home from a double shift at the diner and found my boxes stacked on the porch like discarded trash bags. My childhood photos. My clothes. The ceramic horse Dad bought me when I was 9. All dumped outside. I still remember calling her. "Mom, what is this?" Her voice stayed perfectly calm. "You're 32 years old, Laura. It's time you learned to survive on your own." I lived there while taking care of Dad. And now he's gone. Silence. Then the words that hollowed me out. "You're just a waitress. You were never meant for more than this." Click. I stood there in the rain while water soaked through cardboard boxes and ruined half my belongings. That should have been the moment I stopped loving her. But children don't stop loving cruel parents. They just start loving them in broken ways. The inheritance hearing came after I contested the will. Because according to the version submitted by my mother, Dad had left nearly everything to Daniel. The house. The investments. The lake property. The business shares. I received $50,000. A pity check. My mother's lawyer argued that Dad wanted to reward success. Daniel ran a real estate company. I poured coffee at Rosewood Grill. Case closed. At least that's what they thought. The judge asked if either side wished to make a statement before proceedings continued. And that's when my mother stood. Elegant. Calm. Poisonous. She placed one manicured hand against her chest and looked toward the judge with watery eyes so fake they deserved an Oscar. Your Honor, this has been devastating for our family. My youngest daughter has always struggled emotionally. There it was. The setup. She refuses to accept that her father made practical decisions regarding the estate. Her lawyer nodded solemnly. My stomach tightened. Then she looked directly at me. Not with anger. With embarrassment. Like I was something sticky she stepped in accidentally. Laura is just a waitress. She doesn't understand complex financial matters. Some people in the courtroom glanced at me. I heard somebody cough awkwardly. Danielle smirked. And suddenly I wasn't 32 anymore. I was 12, holding a school art trophy while my mother asked why I couldn't win something academic like Daniel. I was 17, getting accepted into culinary school before my mother laughed and called it glorified kitchen labor. I was 26, crying in a restaurant freezer after my fiancé left me for another woman while my mother told me maybe men preferred ambitious women. Just a waitress. Funny how parents can reduce your entire soul to 2 words. I felt heat climb my throat. But then, I remembered the envelope. The one Dad gave me 6 days before he died. My hand stopped shaking. My lawyer stood slowly. Your Honor, he said, we'd like to submit additional evidence. For the first time all morning, my mother's expression flickered. The clerk carried the envelope to the judge. And suddenly I could hear my heartbeat. Thud. 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 Inside that envelope was a handwritten letter. And a flash drive. Dad had known. God, he had known. The judge adjusted his glasses and began reading silently. My mother's confidence started dissolving by the second. Then came the video. They dimmed the courtroom lights slightly as the screen flickered alive. My father appeared sitting in his hospital bed. Thin. Fragile. Dying. But lucid. His voice cracked like dry wood. If you're seeing this, he said, then Evelyn ignored my final instructions. The room went completely still. My mother stopped breathing. Daniel's smirk vanished. Dad continued. I changed my will 3 months before my death. Laura knows where the original documents are. My mother whispered, no. I closed my eyes briefly. Because this next part hurt even now. Dad coughed violently into a cloth before speaking again. I made mistakes with my daughters. Especially Laura. I allowed Evelyn to diminish her for years because keeping peace was easier than defending my child. Tears burned my eyes instantly. I watched the strongest person in this family become invisible. The courtroom was dead silent. You call her a waitress like it's shameful. Let me explain something. My daughter worked 16-hour shifts and still came to clean my vomit from hospital floors when nobody else would. Daniel stared at the ground. Laura fed me. Bathed me. Comforted me. She is the only reason I died with dignity. My mother's face had gone white. Then Dad dropped the match into gasoline. The restaurant Laura works at? A weak smile crossed his face. She owns it. Every sound disappeared from the room. My mother blinked rapidly. The judge looked up sharply. Dad continued. She bought it 4 years ago through an LLC after the previous owner retired. She begged me not to tell anyone because she wanted to prove she could succeed without this family's money. Daniel turned toward me slowly like he didn't recognize me anymore. I met his eyes without blinking. Dad coughed again, worse this time. Laura isn't a waitress because she failed. She's a waitress because she never thought she was too important to work beside her employees. The tears finally slid down my cheeks. But my father wasn't done. The updated will leaves controlling interest of all family business assets to Laura. My mother made a strangled sound. Because she understood instantly. Dad had discovered something before he died. Something devastating. His voice hardened in the recording. If my wife contests this, release the accounting files to authorities. Now the courtroom exploded in whispers. My mother grabbed the edge of the table. Daniel looked terrified. The judge demanded silence. But I already knew the truth. Dad had uncovered years of embezzlement. My mother and Daniel had been siphoning money through fake development contracts from the family company for nearly a decade. Millions. They thought Dad was too sick to notice. They were wrong. And I, the daughter they mocked for carrying plates, had spent months quietly helping forensic accountants organize the evidence while serving pancakes with a smile. My mother stared at me like I'd become a stranger wearing Laura's face. "You knew," she whispered. I looked at her calmly. "No," I said softly. "I listened." The difference shattered her. Then came the final twist. The courtroom doors opened. 2 investigators from the State Financial Crimes Division walked inside. One approached my mother directly. I'll never forget the sound of her chair scraping backward. Harsh. Panicked. Human. "Evelyn Hart," the investigator said, "you are being formally charged pending investigation for fraud, embezzlement, and financial conspiracy." Daniel shot to his feet. "This is insane." The second investigator cut him off. "We also have warrants regarding offshore accounts under your name." My mother looked at me then. Really looked at me. For the first time in my life. Not as the disappointing daughter. Not as the invisible child. Not as just a waitress. But as the person holding the blade. And the strangest part? I didn't feel triumph. Not immediately. I felt grief. Because no matter what monsters our parents become, some small part of us still wants them to love us honestly. But then my mother spoke. And whatever remained inside me died forever. Her mascara had started running slightly as officers waited beside her. And she hissed. "I should have pushed you harder. Maybe then you wouldn't have become this. This. Not successful. Not strong. Not merciful. This." I stood slowly. Every eye in the courtroom fixed on me. And I walked toward her until we were inches apart. I could smell her expensive perfume underneath the sweat of panic. "You know what's funny, Mom?" My voice barely trembled now. "You spent my entire life teaching me that serving people made me weak." I glanced toward the courtroom doors where investigators waited. "But the whole time, you were the one living off everyone else." For once in her life. Evelyn Hart had no response. Officers escorted her away while cameras outside erupted in chaos. Daniel followed in handcuffs 20 minutes later. And me? I walked out alone into the blazing summer sunlight. Reporters shouted questions. Microphones shoved toward my face. "How does it feel to inherit the Hart estate? What do you say to allegations against your family, Miss Hart?" But I ignored all of them. Because across the street stood an old delivery driver from the diner named Miguel. He'd come during his lunch break still wearing his grease-stained apron. When he saw me, he lifted a paper bag. "Brought you pie," he said gently. "Cherry. My favorite." And suddenly, after all the courtroom battles and betrayal and revenge, that was the moment I finally broke. I cried so hard I couldn't breathe. Right there on the courthouse steps while traffic roared past and reporters watched in stunned silence. Not because I won. But because after a lifetime of being treated like nothing, I finally understood something my mother never would. There is nothing small about honest work. And there is nothing weak about kindness. 3 months later, I reopened the courthouse envelope one last time. Inside was Dad's final handwritten note. Just one sentence. The wrong child spent her whole life begging for love, while the right one quietly earned respect. I folded the letter carefully and looked around the restaurant I now owned openly. The dinner rush was loud. Plates clattered. Coffee steamed in the air. My staff laughed near the kitchen. Real people. Honest people. Outside, reporters were still covering my mother's trial. But inside? Nobody cared about the Hart family name anymore. They cared that table 7 needed extra syrup. And for the first time in my life, being just a waitress felt like the greatest victory of all.